do Jehovah's Witnesses teach and believe that's different from the body of Christ? Why would an active Jehovah's Witness decide to leave the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society? Why does leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses cause family conflict? And why are some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses disfellowshipped? Join us today as I interview Dr. Jeff Schwehm, an ex-Jehovah's Witness who has ministered to and helped many ex-witnesses since he left the organization. This is Kay Meyer, president of Family Shield Ministries, and your host for today's program. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I've known you for many years, but it's been a while, and I thought it was time that we again introduce you to our listeners on 53 stations around the country. I'm not sure if you know that. And have you just kind of share what your life was like as a Jehovah's Witness and why you left. And then on from there, we'll see where the Lord leads us. So tell us about your family and how you got involved, first of all, with the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, what happened was my mother was a pretty active Missouri Synod Lutheran. My dad was a non-practicing Catholic. And around the time I was 5 years old, my mom's mom, my grandmother, passed away, and my mother became very, very depressed. I found this out later by talking to other relatives who knew my mother at the time. But apparently she became very depressed, and one of her best friends from high school showed up at her door. Her best friend had recently converted to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it was kind of all downhill from there. My mother started studying with her. She went from being a Sunday school teacher at the Lutheran Church that she attended to becoming a Jehovah's Witness. She pulled me out of Christian school. I was in kindergarten at the time. And then not long after that, maybe a couple years later, my dad converted, and then my dad's parents converted, and my dad's sister converted. So I have quite a few relatives that got involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses because of her. She became attracted, to this idea that she would see her mother again in a paradise earth, and it just, it became a real split within the family, mainly because, at that time my family stopped celebrating holidays, and really we didn't spend a whole lot of time with the Lutheran side of the Lutheran Christian side of my mom's family anymore. There was kind of a big split that occurred there.
Sure, and that's pretty normal because committed Christians are often very upset but don't know what to say, and it's interesting how many of your family members became Jehovah's Witnesses. I see that a lot. Not that their teachings are correct, but they seem to be really good at convincing people that their teachings are correct. And I guess we can't go into that, but that happens a lot. That doesn't, sometimes they'll look at that and they'll say, see, they all became Jehovah's Witnesses. That means we're right. No, that doesn't. So you were only, 5 years old at the time?
I was 5 years old at the time, and then, at the time, the Jehovah's Witnesses had, 5 meetings at their Kingdom Hall a week. I don't think they have that many anymore. But they had 5, and one of those was a class that taught you how to speak in public. And so I gave my first 5-minute sermon, really, when I was about 8 years old.
Oh, my goodness.
And then I started going from door to door, when I was probably 6. Oh. And then I was baptized. The Jehovah's Witnesses have a believer's baptism. They didn't recognize my Christian baptism as an infant when I was christened at my mom's Lutheran parish. The believer's baptism occurred at I guess I was 17, and then after that I became a full-time door-to-door evangelizer. So they called them pioneer ministers, and I spent about 100 hours a month going from door to door. I lived with my folks, worked part-time, doing yard work and such, and then I spent most of my time going from door to door. When I became about 19 years old, I was invited to serve at their world headquarters, which at the time was in Brooklyn, New York.
Is it not anymore?
It's not. No, they
Oh,
moved
I
it
didn't know
to
that.
upstate New York.
Okay.
They sold most of those properties, or in the process of selling pretty much all of their properties in Brooklyn Heights. So those particular buildings are not. I think pretty much most of them are not being used by the witnesses much anymore, if at all.
So you were just a teenager when you were so involved.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And it's really all you knew because you had grown up from very young age.
Yeah, it was all I knew. And then, you're very isolated because, you're discouraged from associating with anybody who's not a Jehovah's Witness.
Mm-hmm.
You're discouraged from getting involved in extracurricular activities at school.
Mm-hmm.
Your life centers around the Kingdom Hall and the mission that they give you of proselytizing other people and distributing at that time Watchtower literature. So their magazines and their books and such.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, even if you had if you have a family member who's super opposed too, they would even discourage you from associating with that family member as well. So it's a very isolating existence.
That's an interesting point, the isolation. I know that, but I don't think I usually talk about that, especially for a teenage boy.
Yeah, or even from the time I was 5 and up, that was the only worldview I was really exposed to, and then you're told terrible things about the Christians, churches.
Yeah.
They believe that the Christian churches are basically the Church of Satan, and that that with the doctrines of the Christian churches are demonic and things like that. They teach that at the end of time, all non-Jehovah's Witnesses will be destroyed by God, and and then this paradise earth will come in and things like that. So you're really isolated, and the propaganda is hot and heavy, and there's a lot of pressure to conform, particularly to conform under the penalty of being shunned, so that if you break certain rules or question too much, there's this shunning punishment that's also very it's basically emotional blackmail is what it is.
Tell our listeners what shunning is, and would that also be disfellowshipping, or is that something?
Correct. Yeah. So what happens is, if you are accused of breaking one of the rules, or of actually, no longer believing in certain doctrines of the Jehovah's Witnesses, a committee of 3 elders will investigate, and then if they determine that you're not repentant, or they'll make an announcement at the Kingdom Hall that you've been disfellowshipped, and then what happens is all of your Jehovah's Witness friends don't talk to you anymore. And they even encourage family members to treat you as if you're dead. And if your spouse is disfellowshipped, that puts an incredible strain on the marriage, because you're told not to pray with your spouse anymore. You're told not to have conversations about religious beliefs with your spouse anymore. And so there's a lot of pressure to really isolate that person in the hopes that they'll be so isolated that they'll come back. And it actually works. I mean, I know of numerous people who have been disfellowshipped who really don't believe what the witnesses teach, but will go through the motions just to get their family back.
And many times they're working for loved ones that are Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe that they're their boss. So it often is very challenging.
Oh, yeah.
Very challenging.
There's a lot of stories on the internet of people who have lost their entire client base because they were excommunicated.
Right, yes.
Fellowship,
Excommunication. We've done a couple programs on that. It's horrific. Now, what caused you were at the headquarters? That should be the glory place. I mean, you were, I think you said 19 years old. How long were you there, and what did you see that maybe led you to believe this wasn't God's kingdom?
Well, I was there for about a year, and what had happened maybe about 5 or 6 years before I got there, there was a big schism that had occurred within the church, and in like the early 1980s, and I was there in 1984. And there was still a lot of fallout from that, a lot of questions about it.
Was that some of the false prophecy stuff that they did back then?
Yeah. So what happened was in the years leading up to 1975, Jehovah's Witnesses had predicted that Jesus would return in 1975.
Right.
And that was about the time that my mom became a Jehovah's Witness. So I think she was kind of swept up into that a bit. And then when it didn't happen, there was, some people that were okay with it. They just said, oh, well, we made a mistake and moved on. But others had made serious life choices based on that. Yeah. You had people that had sold
their homes, right?
You had people that had put off medical work because of that. And now they're left holding the bag, and all the organization is saying was, oops, I'm sorry. They didn't really take responsibility for basically pressuring people to believe in that.
I met a ex-Jehovah's Witness once that had sold her home during those years of predicting Jesus was coming back. And she gave the money to the Watchtower Society, but then when he didn't come back, she didn't get it back. And
that's correct.
Devastating for many families, right?
And you had people who never went to college because, they're really not that big on higher education. And so, people made big life choices based on their belief that the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses spoke for God in some way.
So what happened with you?
Well, so what happened was, I had heard about the 1975 thing. I really read a lot of their literature, and I've always been kind of a bookworm, so I read a lot of their literature, and I had questions about what had happened, but you had to be careful how you asked those questions because I didn't want to get shunned.
Right.
And so when I went to the headquarters, they had a very large library, obviously, of all the things that the Watchtower Society, which is the Bible publishing society of the Jehovah's Witnesses, had published throughout the years. And I started reading their old literature, and it wasn't matching up to the story that I was getting in 1984. And one of the big things that really kind of bothered me was the Jehovah's Witnesses taught, and I believe they still teach this, that Jesus returned invisibly in the year 1914, around the time of World War I, inspected all the churches of the world, and chose the Jehovah's Witnesses to be his one reestablished true church on earth, and identified the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses as their official spokesperson. And what I was discovering was that, obviously, even the Watchtower literature didn't agree with that particular storyline. And so what happened was, over time, and it started when I was at the headquarters, the credibility of the leaders of the Watchtower Society just, they lost it in my eyes, and I had real problems believing what they were saying, because you could demonstrate from their old literature that they were not depicting their history accurately. They were lying. Yeah. So they were lying about their own history. They made claims that they never predicted the end of the world at any time, but you can go back to their literature and see that they predicted it in 1914, 1925, 1975. I mean, it's a tradition in their particular world to do that.
We have the tract, Who Can You Trust? And I'll be mentioning this later. We purchase and give away tracts to people that want to learn more. And that's all about the false prophecies and where they said it and how it's wrong. I mean, there's so much evidence, but as you said, the Jehovah's Witnesses that are active only see what the organization tells them. Unless they research like you do, they don't find that the foundation of the organization has no credibility, and you can find the truth, but it takes time and energy. We're halfway through the program already, Jeff. Let me make a few announcements, and then we're going to continue, and we want to see why you left and what we as Christians can do when we know a Jehovah's Witness that might have some doubts, and most of the time they're not going to tell us. Family Shield's Counter Cult Ministry purchases and gives away booklets and numerous tracts that will help Christians respond in love to Jehovah's Witnesses. If you'd like to receive these tracts, there's about 6 of them, and our Family Shield booklet about the Counter Cult Ministry, call our response center at 1-877-250-8416. or email us at witnesstofamily@gmail.com. Don't forget to give us your complete name and address. This will be mailed to you. We also sell my book, Mission Field on Our Doorstep, Jehovah's Witnesses. If you'd like to learn how to order it, go to our website at www.familyshieldministries.com. Or again, email us and we can get that information to you. And we have lots of resources on our recommended links. One of the categories is apologetic organizations, and you will just find a wealth of information about that. I'm also going to be a speaker at an ex-Jehovah's Witness for Jesus conference being planned for July 28th and 29th in Farmington, Missouri. So if you're interested, I am not the organizer of this, but I would be happy to refer your email address to the organizer. So email us at witnesstofamily@gmail.com, and I will refer anybody's name that emails us to Charles Smith. He is also an ex-Jehovah's Witness organizing this. It would be for Christians that have loved ones involved and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm sure it'll be a great event. We encourage you to share a message, a prayer request, or a donation to support Family Shield Ministries. Send that to Family Shield Ministries, P.O. Box 230015, St. Louis, Missouri, 63123. You can also reach us through Facebook. Now I want to go back to our program with Dr. Jeff Schwehm. He is a professor at Concordia University in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Jeff, before we continue, just tell us what you do. You obviously, after you left, went to school because they don't encourage their members to get a lot of advanced education. But tell our listeners what you do today.
Well, I teach chemistry at Concordia University in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I teach mostly pre-meds. So
really?
People who are going into the pre-medical field.
Oh.
That's who I think the majority of my population is that I teach.
Fantastic. And you are a great teacher, by the way. So we could do a long series on this. As you talked, I thought of several other topics. But let's get back. We have about a little less than half of a program left. Tell us more about why you left the Watchtower Society.
Well, I left because I no longer believed in their authority, and I was doubting a lot of things, and I think I left a lot also because of a lot of prayer of people around me. My Aunt Maxine. She was very close to our family. She used to babysit me when I was a child. This is one of my mother's relatives. It was her, I guess, really her first cousin. She used to babysit me, and she was actually my mother's godmother when my mother was christened as a Christian when my mom was an infant. And when my mom left the Christian church and became a Jehovah's Witness, my Aunt Maxine took it really hard. So what she did is she started a prayer group at her parish, at her church. And those people met for, at least 25 years, 25 years, every week.
Wow, every week. Wow.
Yeah. To pray for the conversion of at least one person in my Aunt Maxine's family to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, and apparently
that was you.
That was me.
Praise God! Yeah,
because she was one of the first ones I reached out to when I left. So when I left, I was very angry and very upset and very confused, and the Lord put a lot of Christians along the way to really help me out. At the time, the internet, when I was leaving, this had been like in the mid-'90s, I was about 30 years old, and the internet was just becoming really big, and I met a gentleman, I can't remember his name, it's been so long, who realized that I was a Jehovah's Witness, who was questioning and was doubting and was upset, and he really befriended me online, and we started talking on the phone, and he really showed me the love of Christ. He was very patient with me. He prayed for me. He really befriended me. There was no judging involved. There was just a whole lot of love in that particular relationship, and that went a long way to really change my perspective of people who are Christians. You know, as a Jehovah's Witness, you're told that it's hypocrites that go to church. It's people who are misled. The Christian churches are of Satan. He really, his reaching out to me and the way he did it really broke that barrier down.
Fantastic.
And I'm sure he was in deep prayer. In fact, I know later on he told me that, he was praying for me and my family as we left the Jehovah's Witnesses at that time. And
That's
that really
fantastic.
went a long way. And then when I started attending a Lutheran church in Arkansas, I was in grad school at the time when this was happening. Those people really welcomed us with open arms, and that they were open to us. They listened, and they were very gentle with us, and it was just really greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. If you know somebody, a friend or relative who is going through a time period where they're doubting the witnesses, and you know it, pray for them, be a friend, and I would say, even if you have to not talk about theology for a while.
For a while, yeah, absolutely.
Just be there with them and become a friend to them, an honest friend to them, and just love them, like Jesus loved us first.
Right.
And you'll get that response.
Yeah.
It's really tragic. I had a crisis pregnancy center lady call me one time, and she said to me, these single parent Jehovah's Witness ladies come to our crisis pregnancy center, which is run by a group of Christians in our town. And she said they come in and we give them what they need, but they never want to speak to us. They never want to talk to us. And she said, I don't really want to say too much about Jesus because I don't want to scare them off. I want them to keep coming back. And she says, but I know they're in need because they're here all the time. And she says, why isn't the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall helping these women out? And I said, well, most likely they're disfellowshipped. They're being shunned, and so they're not going to help them out if they're being
because
shunned.
They're pregnant and unmarried. Yeah,
correct. I said that would be my guess, and she's like, well, how do I handle this? I said, you're handling it well.
Yeah.
Keep giving them what they need. Keep talking to them and showing them the unconditional love of Jesus, and at some point, and praying for them, and get the people in the community to pray for them, and at some point, an opportunity will come where you can, say something to them.
Right.
And then, in the meantime, I told them, to prepare.
Right. Become prepared. I say that all the time, too. A lot of times people I've talked to said, but you said don't talk to them about Jesus. I'm like, well, I didn't mean forever.
Right.
Pray for them and wait for that open door when they are ready to converse with you, and that we need to focus on who Jesus is because, and we don't have time to delve into this today, they teach a false Christ and a false gospel. And we need to help them know the true Christ of the Bible, that he suffered and died for all people, including them, and that it's not because of their good works that they are going to receive eternal life as a free gift. That is God's gift. How did you come to know Christ? Was it before or after you left, Jeff?
Well, I think it was a process, right?
Yeah,
and
usually.
I learned more and more about him as I encountered him more and more through Christians that he put in my life, really, and also through Scripture. I remember, and I probably got this from a Christian that had said this, because really, when you're a Jehovah's Witness and you read Scripture, the Bible is kind of like, it's interpreted for you by the leaders of the Watchtower.
Right.
You're not encouraged to really consider it as a letter from God to you, personally.
Right.
And I think for the first time ever, one day I sat down and I read the book of Romans, and I said, I'm going to view this as a love letter from God to me. And that was at that moment that I realized that I'm an adopted child of God, destined to be with him for all eternity in heaven, to see him face to face. And that was eye-opening. I had never, and as much as I had read the Scriptures as a Jehovah's Witness, although their Bible is translated weirdly.
Yes.
But I read, but God can do miraculous things. I read the book of Romans in the Jehovah's Witness translation.
Oh, did you?
Still heard his voice.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, I really realized that. And when I realized that, I think I kind of figured out, well, this is what the Christians mean when they call it the Passion of the Christ. That He loved us so much that he, opened up his arms and gave his all for us on the cross to reconcile us to the Father. And that was just not something that, we really realized as a Jehovah's Witness. It's certainly not something that was emphasized because their salvation is such a works-based salvation.
Absolutely. Very legalistic, very works-oriented, as you talked about, shunning or disfellowshipping. It's because they sinned. God forgives our sins, but the organization will throw someone out for doing something that is a sin. Yes, we all sin, but they're very legalistic and law-oriented, and they're not. I would say they're not gospel-focused. I don't know if you would agree with that, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, they don't understand the concept of grace,
right?
And they have a different word for it, undeserved kindness. So they kind of translate it in a different way that I don't think gets the point across that the grace from God is a gratuitous, overwhelming, wonderful gift that we don't deserve, but God gives it to us anyway because He's faithful and He is who He is.
Right. And the other issue, and again, we don't have time to deal with it today, my book does go into this a little bit. We have 2 minutes left, that they teach a false Christ. They teach Jesus is not both true God and true man at the same time. We have 2 minutes left, Jeff. Any closing thoughts? We'll leave that topic for another time.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I realized at one point, too, because, they believe Jesus is a mere angel creature, right? One of the things I realized through discussing it with Christians and others is that, the God of the Christians did all the dirty work Himself to save us because He loved us so much. The God of the Jehovah's Witnesses sent a creature to do all that work. Didn't want to get His hands dirty.
Yeah. So it's false teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Right.
And so, that right there tells you the marked difference in perspective that a Jehovah's Witness has about God compared to what Christians know about the true God and the authentic revelation that God has given us through the work of Jesus Christ. And
all right.
I have to say that when I came to that particular realization, it changed my life
I'm sure
for the better. Yeah. And really, we need to have a heart of love and for the Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly the people who have been kicked out and beaten up, because many of them will even say to you, I left the Jehovah's Witnesses because they still believe in the theology, but they can't live up to the rules. And they'll even tell you, I wasn't good enough for God. That's why God kicked me out of His organization.
Jeff, I wish I could let you finish that thought, but we'll be off the air. We will have you back and talk some more about this. Again, this is Kay Meyer. My guest has been Dr. Jeff Schwehm, an ex-Jehovah's Witness. Learn more on the website at www.FamilyShieldMinistries.com. Thanks for listening. God bless your day.
You've been listening to Family Shield, a production of Family Shield Ministries. Its mission is to educate and equip people through the power of the gospel to know Christ, grow in His Word, and to strengthen individuals and their families. To learn how you can obtain resources or support the ministry, go to www.FamilyShieldMinistries.com or write Family Shield Ministries, P.O. Box 230015, St. Louis, Missouri 63123. And tune in again next week for Family Shield.